Welcome to the New Masculine Podcast. This is a place where masculine identifying people come together in community to disrupt outdated models of masculinity and together construct new models for our way forward as men. As a special note, while this conversation is between men, this podcast values all beings and seeks to create positive impacts for all. I'm your host, Travis Stock. I am a master life coach, an equus coach, which means I often partner with horses when supporting clients, and I'm a teacher. In my coaching work, I am passionate about the balance of masculine and feminine energies in each of us, regardless of gender. I seek to help others nurture a relationship with both types of energy, which often leads to a greater sense of wholeness. And yet what I found in my work with men is that many of us have been taught messages about what it means to be a man by first teaching us to avoid anything that is associated with the feminine. That avoidance leads to few experiences of intimacy, emotions outside of anger, vulnerability, or even a sense of belonging. Striving to comply with these models of masculinity has many of us feeling isolated, ashamed, unworthy, afraid, angry, and depressed. That's why I started this podcast, to bring men together who are ready for something new, something more whole. Many of our conversations on the New Masculine Podcast are pretty serious, and for good reason. They're super serious challenges we are navigating as a culture and as men. And while I'm super comfortable going to the depths of earnestness, play and humor are also incredibly important to me. Lucky for us today, we've got a guest who really knows how to bring the play. Jeff Harry is a motivational speaker who focuses on healing workspaces through positive psychology and play. The core belief he brings to his work is that we already have many of the answers we seek, and by simply unleashing our inner child, we can find our purpose and in turn, help to create a better world. He has brought a playground workplace atmosphere to companies like Google, Microsoft, Southwest Airlines, the NFL, and Amazon, and has been featured in the New York Times, Mashable, Upworthy, HuffPost, and other big media resources. On a personal level, Jeff identifies as a leader, as a mentor, and as a brother. So while we will still be discussing big topics like you're used to here, get ready for some actual playtime as well. Enough of me. Let's welcome Jeff Harry to the New Masculine. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm amped about this. Let's go.
I'm vibing off the amped energy. I think I could feel it coming into it. I had a meeting just before this that I spontaneously was asked to lead, and I led with a ton of play. And so I think I was getting ready for this. And so I was super excited. And it went really well to bring play to a work meeting. So I'm super excited by it. Is there anything else the listener should know about you before we jump in?
Well, when people are like, well, what do you do? What do you actually do? What do you speak about? I talk about how to make work suck less. Because work sucks right now for a lot of people. And, I use play to heal workplaces. And a lot of times you're healing them from things like toxic masculine leaders. So I like to address it from this positive psychology and play perspective.
I love that. And even more important in our current landscape of work that's ever changing and is mostly virtual for a lot of people, that there's a lot of not fun things we're addressing at work, and layoffs are happening at some of the biggest tech companies, and there's a lot of not fun stuff happening. And so I love that there's an invitation also that that it can be playful, that it can be healing in a much more fun way. Well, let's find out some more about you as a man and your journey. So when you think about growing up as a boy into a man in this culture, what are some of the stories that come to mind of things you learned growing up?
Yeah. So my dad is from the Caribbean. He's from a small island off the coast of Barbados called St. Vincent. So it's definitely a more Caribbean English masculine upbringing. That I don't know how to describe it, but it definitely is old school. But my dad was, very regal. That probably the best way to describe him. So he definitely adopted the British system, especially because he was a physician, a cardiologist. So just the way in which he was trained was to be, more proper. And how do you present yourself, and even basic things like how do you, when you're done finishing eating, how do you arrange your fork and knife? There are things like that I don't even realize. I'm only realizing as I'm telling this to you right now, how he actually showed up as a man, right? Like he was very respectful and very grounded and very humble, you know. And I don't know, I really liked that. I didn't realize I really liked it until now.
From everything I know about you so far, it seems sort of like a vast departure from how you show up in the world. Not that you're not following tradition and not sort of structured and following some of those like cultural rules, but you do bring a little bit more levity and play to it that maybe doesn't exist in those kind of old British
Yeah,
structures.
I'm much more play oriented. That's just how I've been, my whole life. I saw the movie Big when I was a kid and then I was like, you can be a toy designer. So I started writing toy companies when I was in third grade, and I just kept writing them until I got into the toy industry, which was super toxic. But play's always been my jam, and play is much more feminine than it is masculine, right? Like it's much more rooted in collaboration and curiosity and following your intuition. So I definitely think I was probably more influenced from my mom than my dad. I think if I adopted anything from him was like uh the humbleness, right? And like, how do you show up in the room? Like he shows up in the room in a very like confident, strong, grounded way. I show up as play in the room, so it's the same. I'm also trying to create a safe space, but I do it in a more playful way instead of like a more regal way.
But I can see where there's a connection between sort of like the confidence and energy that he brings into the room and the energy you bring into the room. From the moment we first met, there's a confidence, there's like a solid groundedness in self and willingness to invite others to come be in that space with you. Like,
Yeah.
so I can see
Yeah.
where there's maybe a connection between those.
And I was talking about this recently. I was running this workshop. It's one of my favorite workshops to run with my friend Sarah Serrani. We were at South by Southwest doing this for like 75 people, and it was called Embrace Your Fears, We Over Me. And it was this whole idea of like, we embrace our fears typically by ourselves, right? We isolate ourselves, especially men, right?
Oh,
Like,
especially men.
we are constantly, I am being like, I can handle it. I will be able to, I can do this by myself. I should do this by myself. Like these stories, right? And while I was running the workshop, two things happened that I thought were really powerful. One, this guy, basically, we had people write down their fears, and his fear was that he gets rejected, and he constantly gets rejected. And then he even said in front of all these people, like this huge circle of 70 people, and he's just like, and I deserve to be rejected. I was like, dang, dude, this guy's going through some stuff. Well, then later on throughout the workshop, we tried to, have them embrace it from a community standpoint, like we'll all hold space for each other, which isn't always masculine. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And then he stood up later on because we had people write down, who do they think of that has their back? Who are the people that they lean on or they could lean on, right? And we're not even talking about just people here, but like your ancestors, your descendants, anyone that you've ever interacted with. Just write people down that have influenced your life. And he stands up and he goes, I'm looking at this list, and everyone on this list has never rejected me. And it was this powerful moment where this guy in less than 45 minutes had gone through this transformation of telling himself a new story now, where he was just like, I always thought I got rejected a lot, but actually I don't get rejected that much anyway. And a lot of people actually love and care for me. So that was really powerful. But the other part that kind of ties into what we said earlier about walking into the room is we had them do that exercise where they reflect on who are their friends and family that have their back, who are their ancestors, who are people like that have impacted them, even people that they've listened or read about. Because Maya Angelou would always say, like, the reason why she walks into the room confidently is because she's carrying everyone that she's ever connected with, anyone that's ever inspired her, any of her ancestors that helped, as she traversed across America here, right? Like all of the pain and suffering and realizations and the successes and the failures, all of that is now embedded in her. And when she walks into the room, she walks in the room with 300 people behind her. And it's like, how could you not walk into a room confident that way? So I was like, oh man, I think about that whenever I walk into the room. I ask myself, how can I be play in the room? And I think that's an interesting question to ask anyone. Like when you walk into the room, what do you want to be? What is the word you'd want to be in that room? And how would you embody it?
Oh, I love that. Wow. And talk about another person, Maya Angelou, that walks into the room with a regalness to her energy
Mm-hmm.
or walked through.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
And
she got Tupac to cry. Tupac Shakur was on the set of Poetic Justice. I think that was the movie. And he was about to fight someone, and it might have led to something even more violent. And she just turns to him, looks him dead in the eye. He doesn't even really know who she is, just kind of knows her. And he's just like, she's like, what's wrong? Like, what's wrong, baby? Like, what's wrong? And he just starts bawling because she can see into his soul, right? Like she's bringing all of this energy with us, and it caused this dude to just start like bawling and like hugging her. So yeah, that's powerful.
Yeah, and to show up with a level of curiosity like that, like what's going on, rather than like getting in someone's face and confronting them, but
Or
curiosity.
trying to fix it, like you need to calm down instead
Yeah.
of just being like, just tell me what's wrong.
Talk
Yeah.
about some powerful feminine leadership right there in that
Yep.
moment that isn't about
Yep.
coming to set boundaries or to create safety and structure in the system, but to actually just connect with someone and see
Yes.
into them. That's powerful. I want to go back. You shared that example of the person at South by Southwest that had this story internalized that he gets rejected by everyone and deserves to be rejected. But by the end of it, had a completely new experience of rejection and himself within that storyline. I think that's so true for most of us, that we carry around stories that limit us, stories that were based in past experiences that maybe there was some truth to them, but we carry around these stories about ourselves that are based in old thought patterns, old belief systems, old emotional experiences that have not been checked or unpacked. Do you have any that come to mind for you that you think of that you maybe like internalized growing up or that you've had to evolve over time?
Yeah, I mean, some old stories about like, having to be the provider, right? Like that, I'm still probably stuck on that. I'm still probably stuck on some patriarchal stuff that like, if I make more money, I'm more valuable, right? There's this whole language right now about the high value man. And how do you be a high value man? You got to make a lot of money, you got to have a lot of muscles, and then you got to get a lot of women, and I think and most of that stuff I find is like just pure BS. But like, but when, I'm running my business, and especially early on when I was struggling, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I can never be a provider. I can, I'm not earning enough to, and you start questioning your manhood, right? Like I think that's something sometimes when I'm talking to other entrepreneurs getting into that like competitive, oh, how much are you making? Or where are you speaking? Oh, you got access to that stage. I didn't get into that. That comparison, that rat race comparison that is just kind of like a waste of time. I've fallen sometimes victim to that, right?
It's so easy to in our culture. I mean,
so
in a capitalist culture that tells us like our value and our worth is based on our financial wealth and security. And I think men really, that provider archetype is something we hear really early on that we're supposed to fall into. And even myself in a same-sex relationship, like I even have to watch my own as a solopreneur, like trying to build something, and I'm not struggling, but I'm also not making tech money, and I live in Seattle. And so it's like, oh, okay. And so my partner is in a tech job now and is making different kinds of money. And I watch my own sense of value and feeling emasculated in moments about like, how do I keep up in this? How do I at least even be an equal in my relationship? So I think that those of us that even don't necessarily fit like the kind of traditional cisgender heterosexual masculine archetype we still have to navigate that, and it's still really easy to put our worth into how much money we make.
I mean, my friend Angie Cole talks how dangerous that is whenever we're like, even that sentence, how getting paid what you're worth, like that's a dangerous sentence, because that sentence means that you can put a money value on your worth, right? And that's kind of what I think a lot of times, especially us men, do, where we are constantly looking for some number to measure us, right? How many followers, how many podcast downloads, how much money, how many speaking engagements, how many, what is it, viral videos. Like there's this constant comparison in whatever industry or whatever you're doing, where you're like, well, I don't have what this other person has, and I mean, I don't think that's distinctive to just men, but that comparison is hard for us, and we push it upon each other as a way to kind of like really feeling superior when we feel really insecure, because the amount of people that I've met that you would consider high value men, or men that are like metrically doing well, most insecure, some of the most insecure people I meet.
That's the big trick about this sort of like external validation thing about the amount of followers or the amount of money is that even if you get to that goal number, your goalpost just moves, and so success it moves further, and so then you're going to feel insecure at the new level of money that you make, and so because you change your lifestyle along with that, and so it's kind of this like rat race, this game that is like a kind of a lie that we're all playing in, where our value is and our worth is external to us, and that we need to go after that thing.
And it's interesting. I forgot what the exact story was, but it was like this artist dude, maybe he'd been a comedian, and he was hanging around all these like rich ass folk. And they're bragging about all this stuff, like, where they're traveling, where they own in other countries, blah, blah, blah. And then they were like, well, what about you, comedian guy? Like, what's up with you? And he said something to the effect of, well, I have something none of you have. And they're like, what? And he's like, a feeling of being enough. And it was like, ooh,
mic drop.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, even Taylor Mali, this poet, would say that same thing with like teachers, because, a guy confronted him and was like, well, what do you make, Taylor? Like, how much do you make? And he goes, you know what I make? I make kids feel more important than they've ever felt. Like, I do things that can't be measured. And I think that, like, us finding ways in which to find new metrics that are built off of something that's much more soulful and much more not external, right? That's driven by an intrinsic value. That's where I think is where it can be really powerful.
So I'm fully on board with that. But I think a lot of men will feel like that's a big leap to go, okay, now what are those things internally? So do you have any sort of things that you can point to that you would suggest, or ways that we can do that?
I mean, I think we first have to like go down the rabbit hole of like, well, what's enough, right? Like Michael Phelps won more gold medals and more medals than anyone in history. He went into depression as soon as he got there, right? I know a lot of people whose net worth is probably between $5 and $10 million, miserable, right? But people still don't believe you. They still are like, well, that's true, but I'd like to see that for myself. Like they're like,
let me try it. I have a hand at it.
Let me try. Let me get access to that money, and then I'll see. Right. But it's not even just the idea of the goalpost is moving. I think it's this idea that there's a winning. Like I like we have to win. I recently saw this really messed up YouTube video that was like, why men don't like going to therapy. And the guy basically was just like, men need purpose. And if they don't have purpose, then they think about killing themselves. So this is why therapy doesn't work, because therapy is all about feeling seen, heard, and appreciated, which is great for women. But it's not enough for men. Like, us men need purpose. And he even gave this example of like these guys that were in depression, and then the war started, and then he was just like, now they have purpose, and that's how they got out of their depression. And then he even said this thing that I found even more disturbing, where he's like, this guy was in depression, and then his wife got pregnant, and then he had purpose. And I was like, whoa, dude, like this is dangerous, that any woman that's listening to this is like, oh, well, do I need to get pregnant in order to get my boyfriend or my husband out of depression. Like, this is not
Yeah.
healthy at all, right?
Boo to all of that.
I know, man, but it's so scary. But that is how a lot of men. I mean, I'll send this link to you after, but don't share it because he's getting enough. But there were all these people that were like, all these men that were like, yeah, I need purpose or I feel I'm worthless, and that's where there's danger, right? And I think where we need to explore is how would it feel just to feel appreciated? How would it feel just to feel seen and heard and actually believe that is actually enough? Based off of the capitalistic patriarchal structure of the US, that's really difficult to do. But if you look at other countries, especially the blue zones where people live past 100, they've been able to capture that. Their value comes in being around family. Their value comes in, being a mentor. Their value comes in just being alive and being appreciative of what the day holds for them, right? They may not have legacy like Rockefeller, but does anyone remember what Rockefeller was besides his name and all the buildings? Like, do you want that? Like, is that enough for you? Like, you're going to work that hard and put your name on everything and then still feel inadequate at the end of the day? Succession, Billions, Wolf of Wall Street, all of those just show rich people that are just not happy, even though they have everything. So I think the challenge for men from an intrinsic value is to find joy in the process and find joy in the play. I would challenge them to play more with no result, right? Not for winning's sake, but just to find what are their plays, and that's where they can find their own inside value.
I love that you pointed out that thing around winning that's so important in our culture. And I think we are socialized as boys so often to win. It's like most of our play is about how do we conquer, how do we be dominant, how do we win at a game, at a sport. And that's where our value starts to come from. And so I love that you point that out, because then it gives us a doorway to start looking at what needs to be maybe not undone, because I like winning at things. I like playing games and competing in things. I don't think it's necessarily inherently bad, but when it's the only approach to relationship and connection and way to be involved with other people, that's where it becomes dangerous. And I love that you're pointing out that YouTube person's whole belief system that we need to continue creating systems and structures that actually reinforce an old way of an old system for how men and people source their value. What if we created a new system? We're at such a pivot point in our culture, in our world, and a necessary pivot point, that why are we going to try to recreate the same thing that kind of led us to these unsustainable ways of being in relationship with ourselves, with each other, with this world, this planet? Like, why are we going to keep reinforcing that?
Right. And how is patriarchy working out for you, right? Because especially for men, you would think we would be benefiting from it, and we probably are benefiting more than anybody else, but we still are not benefiting. We still feel inadequate at the end of the day. How does it feel when you feel superior to someone else? Does that feel good? How does it feel when you feel inferior to someone else? And why are we trying to win everything? Right? Like, I ask people all the time, can you win conversation? You shouldn't. But if you watch every thing on CNN and Fox, they're always trying to beat each other. But that's not actual good discourse, right? That's almost like asking a kid, did you win Playground? How was Playground? Did you win it? Did you beat everyone else on the playground? What are you talking about? Like, a kid wouldn't understand that. And there's so many other things. Like, do you win relationship? Are you winning your relationship right now? Like, it sounds absurd, but especially it's been challenged, especially for cisgendered, straight men. Like, you constantly have to, it's such this black and white way of, is this a good day or a bad day? Did I win the day or did I lose the day? What does that even mean, win the day, right? So, did I conquer the day? What is that thing? Carpe diem? Seize the day? That's not what it actually means.
It's
It
not win the
doesn't
day.
mean, it does not mean seize the day. It doesn't even use the word seize. It, what is it? A real, I gotta make sure I say this correctly. The real meaning of carpe diem. It's something more along the lines of like pluck the day, which is like enjoy, like smell the flowers, enjoy the day. It's not about seizing and conquering, and that one word changes it up that you feel like you have to destroy the day. Oh, I just destroyed that talk. Why are we using such violent language I destroyed, this year, like I made so much money. Like, that violent language is just, not only does it make other people feel inferior, but it doesn't make you feel better in the long run, because then
Yeah.
you're constantly having, like, because you're winning so much, you constantly have to look for other ways to win. And if you're not winning, you are worthless. That is what the patriarchy tells you.
Yeah, you're basically a drug addict. You're just searching for the next hit. You get that
Exactly.
that dopamine and serotonin release and that sort of adrenaline of conquering something for a moment, and then it goes away, and then you got to find the next source of it.
Yeah.
So it totally is that. One of the things that's in our sort of cultural zeitgeist right now that I know you and I both connect on is like the masculinity that's represented in Ted Lasso, where it's centered around a sport, the sport of soccer, football in the UK. And so there's winning, and there's a game to be played, and there's competition to be played, but there's a different form of masculinity that's represented by a lot of the characters on there.
Mhm.
And even some of the ones that sort of embody some of the more traditional masculine stereotypes that we think of. There's always these moments of invitation into something new. I'd love to hear some of your perspective on like kind of why Ted Lasso sticks out to you as sort of like a new example of masculinity, or what that show is offering us.
Well, it's interesting because if you ask around and you're like, what is a show that displays healthy masculinity? I can't think of many shows, which is really problematic, right? You have Fast and Furious or every rock movie, and it's always, again, about winning and losing. And Ted Lasso embodies this healthy masculine that is grounded, that provides a safe space for his team to grow. In the first season, without ruining it for people, they're not winning a lot. Okay. but like any team that he's gone in to change, like, it starts off by him building relationships. It starts by him understanding what that person's why is and why they are there. It starts by him helping them rediscover their play, rediscover why they love soccer in the first place. And that's where, they start to bond as a team. They even at one point in the first season burn stuff, and that could be seen as very woo-woo, but burn stuff from their past to finally let go of the past in order for them to move on to bigger and better things, right? So he wasn't focused on results at the beginning. He was focused on building this safe, grounded space where they could connect as a brotherhood, right? And I think we don't see that enough. And then from that, winning can take place. But again, that is not the goal. The goal is, and heck, John Wooden, the most winningest coach in college basketball, never focused on winning.
Yeah.
He would get angry at his team when his team would win, but they did not live up to their potential. And he focused on them pursuing, how do you want to show up as a man? How do you want to show up as a leader on this court right now? And then at the end of the match, do you feel that you did right by yourself? Ted embodies that. Ted Lasso embodies that. And that is rare to see in a leader. But that's how you build long-lasting organizations, long-lasting teams, long-lasting relationships, because you're focused on something more than just the immediate win.
Yeah, I grew up in the era of Lute Olson at the University of Arizona basketball team. And that was sort of like what we loved about Lute. He was a part of our our community in Tucson, Arizona, that was about creating good men, that was about rewarding when men do good stuff, but if you're not showing up for your classes, if you're doing stupid stuff, you're not going to play even if you're the best player. And so it wasn't about winning per se all the time. And we won a lot when Lute Olson was our coach. And yet there was this invitation towards a better humanness that was there even within the sport. And I see that all the time in Ted Lasso too. And there's moments where it starts to veer away from that, and Ted brings it back. And then I just love, and I completely agree with you. While there's some sort of camp and cheese to the show, it's still this playful element that we don't get to see from men. Mm-hmm. And I actually also love that Ted sort of embodies that playful, optimistic person that's always seeing things through like a sunny disposition. And yet we also get to see him as a human, and his anxiety and his fears come up, and his stuff come up. And we get to see how even sometimes we can swing too far into that direction and use that as a coping strategy that disconnects us from what's really going on from us. So you get to see, like, it doesn't say everyone needs to be like Ted, but it does give us a new archetype to play off of, to look at, to notice, to invite us into.
And I love that you said an archetype, right? Because, like, you know, he's evolving himself, right? He sometimes moves too far feminine, sometimes he moves too far masculine himself, right? Like that there's growth in the process. Again, we're talking about process, we're talking about play rather than results. I think I always talk about how expectations are the thief of joy, you know, and how what is it? It's not privilege, but what is it when you think you deserve stuff? I don't even know what the term is now. I'm going blank on what that is. But, you know, that you just expect things to come your way. And the exact opposite of that is gratitude. You know, people that have, you know, helped their lives have a form of gratitude, a consistent form of gratitude, rather than there's this expectation that they're always going to get more things. It's like an, you know, I don't know if you've ever been to like an all-inclusive resort, but you start not appreciating it after a while because you're getting everything for free, right? And then you start to get really spoiled, and you're like, well, why this thing not come out in 1 minute instead of in 5, you know?
Completely inconvenienced.
That's that whole world, right? And I just saw this recently, I think like a week ago, where someone was breaking down why people go to restaurants. And they were like, well, a lot of people go to restaurants to have food, right? And so they don't have to cook. But some people go to restaurants to feel superior.
Ooh.
They want that exactly. They want that dynamic of being served. They want that dynamic of feeling like someone is at their beck and call. And like, right? Like that is creepy, but that ties into a certain level of like results and winning and toxic masculine, because you're feeling so insecure about yourself that you have to go out somewhere else and make someone else feel bad. I don't know if you ever seen like a retail worker or a fast food worker get berated by somebody, but you're like, what are you doing? Like, they get paid $8 an hour. Like, why are you making them feel so bad about themselves? And it's because that person's hurt people, right?
Yeah, and sometimes people need a foil out there in the world to help them sort of regain a sense of power in themselves. And yet, what would it be like to just focus on empowering yourself rather than needing to have power over others? Which is something we talk about on this podcast a lot, is that so many men are trained to think about power as in a power over. There's like a scarcity mindset, like there's only so much power to have. And yet, what would it be like to have power with other people? What would it be like to recognize that there's an abundance of power, and that power comes from inside, not just from the outside?
And it's egalitarian, right? That you can raise all boats. In positive psychology, we talk about how there's plenty of work for all of us. the world is suffering. There's plenty of work for us. While if you think of most companies, they're like, we got to beat that company.
Uh-huh.
We got to take the market share. Even just that idea of like, you got to take market share assumes there's only so much market share and then we can't expand upon it. And that's where like the hurt people and the toxic masculinity then starts to like directly affect people and the world in a really negative way. And an example of that is I used to do a lot of campaign work. And I remember speaking to like the campaign manager. This guy was in charge of like 10,000 people, including like a lot of leaders from it was like a national campaign. And I remember meeting him after the election was over, and I was like, "Hey, how you doing?" And he's just like, "Oh, I'm just sad." I'm like, "Oh, why are you sad? We won. This is what you wanted. You wanted us to win. We won." And he's just like, "Yeah, but then what? Like, I can't. I don't want to wait for the next election. Like, I want to get going again." And I was like, "This dude is so manic
Mm.
and so obsessed with the chase." And probably also on a lot of drugs, a lot of uppers,
A lot
right?
of uppers.
And then he was pushing us in this crazy way for 6 months to a year simply because he himself doesn't feel like enough. So then he puts these massive demands on everyone else around the country to also work at a rate that's just not healthy or sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you have a lot of leaders like that are people think are like, oh, these are really good leaders, but really what they're covering up is insecurity. Like the amount of insecurity Elon Musk is covering up is
Mm-hmm.
massive.
Massive.
And look at the pain and suffering that he's causing to all these people because of it.
I know. It's so wild to watch this play out. To wrap up our sort of like talk on Ted Lasso, I know that if people might be interested to hear more about your perspective, and I know this is something you're passionate about. I
Yeah.
know you also host a podcast all about this, and then maybe
Yeah.
even
So,
leading a
yeah.
workshop coming up.
Well, two things. Yeah. So, my friend Dimple and I started a podcast, I guess, a year and a half ago called What Would Ted Lasso Do?
Mm.
And it actually breaks down the show through the lens of positive psychology and leadership. Right. Because there's so many good nuggets, not just from Ted, but from like Rebecca, who is the owner, from Rupert, who's this really toxic dude, from Jamie Tart, who was cocky and now is trying to figure that out, from this guy, Roy, who's like, very masculine, and very like, I have no feelings, but eventually he communicates his feelings. Like you can see all of this. And we love to break that down because there's so much humanity in each and every character, and you see a bit of yourself in each and every character. And we even ran I don't know, an event a while back where we had a bunch of TED heads and we asked people, who do you relate with most? And then we had them act that person out to other people and find their opposite, right? Like, oh, you're a Roy, find your Keeley, things like that, right? But then now I'm running a workshop called What Would Ted Lasso? Why Ted Lasso's feminine and masculine leadership matters. And it's this whole idea of like, why is it important to have that balance? Because he has that balance of both healthy feminine and healthy masculine leadership, which makes it a safe space for his team to grow, right? So I'm basically, explaining how we need to find leaders, kind of like the Spanx person that currently runs Spanx, that both display that grounded, focused, driven, providing a safe container, that healthy masculine, but then also taps into their intuition and their collaboration and their ability to like coach rather than command, which is more described as healthy feminine in their leadership.
I'm so glad that you're doing that. I know that I can't be the only one that's sort of like enthralled by the world that Ted Lasso has created as a show and like wants more of it. Like my partner and I, before this new season came out, went and rewatched the whole thing again just to make sure we could get back into it again. And so if anybody's looking for more Ted Lasso, I cannot recommend your podcast enough and your workshop that you're leading, because I love that you're using that as a basis for that balance of the masculine and feminine energies. That is like my passion spot in my work, is to help people find that balance. because regardless of our gender, we all have both sides of that coin and everything in the middle. And yet many of us have been taught to sort of disconnect from one side of it or the other. And so when we free ourselves up, we have more access to more. It's not a subtractive thing, it's an additive thing.
Yes, yes. And here's something interesting, and I had to learn this. So last year I ran a workshop called Dudes Do Better, Dismantling Toxic Masculinity at Work. People love the workshop. No one wanted to hire me for that. Nobody wanted to hire me.
Interesting.
Why do they not want to hire me? It's called Dudes Do Better. A lot of dudes are like, I don't want to be told that I need to do better, you know? So in many ways, I had to rebrand it or reframe it from like a standpoint that also creates a safe space for men, because I clearly wasn't doing that in my last workshop, right? Maybe it seemed so anti-men, even though I literally said that in the workshop, but a lot of men were taken aback by it. And it was just like, okay, well then let's, let me learn from that and figure out how we're going to talk about what is the best type of leadership and how do we build that together.
Yeah, I think it's so easy for people to be on the defensive or to feel insecure when thinking about those, because our cultural conversation is pretty fraught right now around toxic masculinity and men. And so it can be very easy for men to think like that it's shaming in some ways. And so it is about how do we, as people that are inviting men to expand and to grow, to find new language that actually does create enough psychological safety that they do want to come in, but still has all of the same elements of we can help dismantle what's not working. We can help create something new. And my thought is that women and queer folk and people of color have been sort of holding the burden of that emotional labor for a really long time. And I think it is time for us as men to step into this conversation. And we don't have to do it from a place of feeling awful about ourselves, but we do have to confront some weird and hard stuff that has been, it's not always the most comfortable. So I'm so glad that you're doing that. We acknowledge Ted Lasso as sort of an archetype of a healthy masculine. And I know that you and I both value continuing to look for other archetypes. And we notice that it's hard to see in the media really healthy versions. Do you have any that you would call out as others other than Ted Lasso that you see out there in the world that people can look to?
Yeah, there's a few. So from an actor standpoint, healthy masculine, Terry Crews, right? Terry Crews is this built dude, right? Massively built dude, like more muscles than any other man I know, right? But he has confronted a lot of his toxic masculinity. He talks about how, he used to be addicted to porn, right? And how he had to break away from that and what impact that had on his relationships and how he actually treated people. When you look at him, you would think like he'd come really strong, but he's much more like caring and empathetic and sharing, his mental health struggles in a way that is just like, oh my gosh, this really masculine man is communicating that. Other actors that are currently doing that, recently, the actor from Michael B. Jordan, from Apollo Creed, from Creed, right? Him and this other actor who's in Creed 3 with them, they took a photo together where they were like brothers, but they were like really close to each other. And they're straight men. Well, all these men started being like, what are we doing? Why are you taking away the mask? It's too feminine. Like, they look like they're dating. Like, what's up with that? And they confronted it directly and were just like, why can we not show a certain level of affection towards each other without it being considered, gay or this other label of not masculine, right? So I loved how they confronted it. There was this other actor where I think it might have been Rihanna's like husband or whatever it is, but he was getting pulled from the back and she was leading from the front, and they were like, what? Why is it wrong for men to be men? What's wrong with men to be men? And he was just like, why can't I be behind her in this photo and still communicate that I'm holding space for her from a healthy masculine stance? So from an actor standpoint, I've seen that, which I think has been really well done, but I think it needs to be pushed more. from a leadership CEO standpoint, I look to people like the Spanx CEO. The Spanx CEO, she both is, you know, focused on numbers and make sure that her name's Sarah Blakely. Sarah Blakely. But yeah, Sarah Blakely at the same time, you know, driven by numbers and is able to, you know, meet certain metrics, the way she treats her staff, right? How she shares in, you know, when they went public, when they, I think at one point she bought them all, they could have a plane ticket to anywhere in the world, all expense paid to anywhere in the world. That was their reward. In addition to, I think, like $10,000 just of like extra money to spend, right? Like her ability to reward and make sure that her staff feels seen, and, you know, and it coming from a divine feminine place of really taking care of her staff, but also making sure that she hits her numbers and they hit certain metrics. Yeah, she's done a phenomenal job from that CEO standpoint. And they found that I think 41 of the top women CEOs are outperforming 549 other male CEOs, you know, and they have also found a way in which to both balance the feminine and masculine. Those are the best leaders because they are able to hold space. You know, people criticize Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand prime minister now, but during the pandemic, she was very clear about boundaries and making sure that certain people didn't come into the country, and being very clear about what is actually happening. Strong, masculine, but then also had enough compassion and empathy for her constituents that she provided them enough funds so that they didn't have to leave their house or spread the virus. And what happened because of that? Lowest COVID rates, lowest COVID death rates in the world, per capita, right? Per capita. Because she came from a healthy masculine and healthy feminine place.
Well, I think it might be worth looking at why we criticize her now. I don't know. Maybe I don't know the whole story, but in some ways, like, is it possible that we started criticizing her for being a human because she got too big for her britches as a woman in this world, as a female leader? Like, you got to tamp that down. You can't let her be a real person and what is she in, like, her 30s? Like, yeah. Like, heaven forbid she be a real human being in her 30s. And now we need to criticize her and villainize her in some way and push her out. Like, I just think there might be some of that in there, just like we do to men, where, like you were talking about the actors, Michael B. Jordan and the other actor in Creed being too close to each other, in that we have to criticize them and say, whoa, you're stepping out of line, and you can't do that. And it's like, the reality is most guys I know, when I've done workshops with men, is that most guys are looking for more intimacy with each other. And we just don't have any models for it other than sports, drinking with our buddies, and then gay men. Those are the only other options. And we've spent so much of our lives dehumanizing and making gay men less than, that we don't want to be that, because that means we have less power in the world. And so we can't be that. So it's just like, it's so wild how much policing goes on with each other.
So much policing, man. There's this comedian, Bill Burr. I mean, some people like him, some people hate him, but he has this really great bit about how, and he used to do this back in like early 2000s, where he would talk about, as a guy, especially when you're hanging out with other straight dudes, if you do anything that makes sense, like, let's say you bring an umbrella when it's raining, all your straight male friends start making fun of you. Like, look at this guy. He brought an umbrella. What a, you know, and then a derogatory gay term, right? What that
sissy,
guy,
what a fag.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. What, you're going to order bananas on your pancakes? What are you going to order? You'll probably then want that banana up your butt, like just this constant.
It's such a far reach.
Like it's such a far reach, but they just run to it, and you're like, dude, what is up with you? Like, why are you so scared of communicating a certain level of, you know, being effeminate in some way, when we're all on a spectrum? Like, I can say that I'm attracted, like, some attractive guys out there, without me then being like, well, then I'm full on gay. Well, I guess it's all, you know, like, again, it's so black and white, right? And I think a lot of men are looking for some level of connection where they don't have to, like, I want to be able to hug my friends, but only that happens when they win the championship. Like, seriously, is that the only time? You know, in India and other parts of South Asia and Southeast Asia, men hold hands. It's not that big of a deal. Like, it's just not that, it's not a big whoop, you know. And dude, you ask two straight men to hold hands here.
Yeah, right.
They would be like, you're gonna have to pay me $1 million. Like, it's that ridiculous. Like, yeah, man, come on,
man. I got to tell you, that umbrella example really hit home. As in living in Seattle, like real quote unquote Seattleites don't use umbrellas. I'm a man with thinning hair. I use an umbrella. I bring an umbrella, and it's like people go, "Oh, got it."
I know, they're like, shrug your shoulders up, just deal with it. That's
just put your Gore-Tex coat on and just get out there.
Right, be a man. And it's just like, what does that even mean, dude? Like, what does that even mean? You know,
totally.
You know, walk it off. Like, seriously.
So I've had such a great time talking with you. I think that's so important that it's such an important value system of mine to like be somebody that can go to the depths of what's going on in our lives, to the grief, the hurt, the heartache, the hopelessness, the sorrow. And I do a lot of that in my work, but I'm also somebody that needs to like bounce out and play and laugh and not take it too seriously, because I can get stuck in the muck down there. And so finding spaces where people are being able to do both, where I love that example you shared of the person at South by Southwest. It keeps sticking with me because you acknowledge like, ooh, this guy's going through a lot.
Yeah.
Like, to feel unworthy or to feel worthy of rejection, basically. Like, you were like, ooh, there's a bigger story here. And that you're not afraid to acknowledge that and see that and be there, but you don't also have to then swoop in and hold all the time, that you can invite him to see his story in a new way from a more playful and light place. And I think I'm so glad you came on here, because I tend to be somebody that I love both, but I can tend towards the depth part and the earnestness. And I sometimes need that invitation to come out and play sometimes as a way that is also just as valid as a healing opportunity.
Well, this is the power that I love about play, right? And this is what I've been going to be talking about in a TEDx talk I'm pitching, is this idea that play can dismantle hierarchy, right? Like, true play, pure play does not focus on results. You know, you are fully in flow. You are fully in your zone of genius. You are fully present. And even sports players talk about this when they get into the zone where like everything slows down and they don't even care that they're winning or losing. They're just enjoying the moment. And that's when you're doing your best work, right? Your most vibrant work. And I think a lot of times we forget that play is what connects us as humans. When we initially, our first form of play is attunement. And this happens between like a baby and their parent. And it's when the wavelengths, the brain wavelengths, are the exact same as the person. So that mom is experiencing the exact same thing as that kid. And then you look for that attunement for the rest of your life. For the rest of your life, you're looking for that level of attunement. And you can find that again in play with others, right? When a team is at play and they're working together, they see each other. They know what each other are thinking beforehand. So the more we can actually tap into that, the answer when people are like, well, how do I tap into more of my healthy masculine? Start playing more and see what actually comes up for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And it might scare you what comes up for you. You may judge it. You may criticize it because our culture has taught us that some of those things that naturally arise out of us are not safe or not welcome or are feminine. Scary.
I know.
But it does invite play. Play does.
And I will say this also, like, you know, there's a lot of men that are like, women hate us right now, or they're not getting along with us. And it's just like, dude, if you embraced more of your feminine, they would like I think about it, you know, from a standpoint. I met this guy who was like a cheerleader, like a male cheerleader, or a straight male cheerleader. Whoa, so rare, right? But he was just like, it's the best place to be, right? You know, be at dance classes. It's the best place to be to meet straight women. Like, it's amazing the amount of stories that men tell themselves where they're like, yeah, women are gold diggers. Actually, out of any time, they need your money less than ever before. That's not what they need. They need you to start cultivating compassion, empathy, and other emotional intelligence skill sets, and stop trying to fix everything. Stop trying to be to see them as the damsel in distress, and be more of like a partner with them rather than you having to come in this old patriarchal way. And actually, you probably wouldn't even enjoy doing it that way anyway. So allow yourself to play more in spaces that might make you feel more feminine, and sit in it, and you'll realize it's not that bad. If anything, it's more fun and more liberating.
Gosh, I love that. Typically, I end my conversations by asking guys, like, what's the one piece of advice you want to leave men with? And I'm very open to giving you space to leave something else, but that feels like you just offered it right there.
I mean, that might be it. More play, more finding your space, yourself in more, feminine oriented spaces, and being in that and being okay with that, right? And I challenge you also to express how you feel towards other men. I know that are your friends, right? I mean, my friend Leslie Liu, who is a trauma-informed self-defense coach, talks about how now she tells her male friends all the time that she loves them when she sees them, Like, she's trying to make that more common with them, so they'll start doing it with each other as well, because, like, we don't say it enough. We don't say it at all. We don't even. When was the last time you expressed how much you appreciate, having one of your male friends as someone that has your back? Like, I just appreciate you as a human being. When was the last time you said that to them? You know how much they are looking for that, but also scared to say it. So I challenge you there as well.
Yeah, and that challenge, once you cross over that line, it gives permission for other guys to do it too. Like you said, guys are craving it, they just don't feel like they can. And yet when we give each other permission by showing up authentically and real with our real feelings, we give permission for other people to step into that too.
Yeah.
Well, I've had such a great time talking with you. Thank you for inviting us all into play here on The New Masculine so we can get ourselves out of so much earnestness. If people wanted to find out more about the work you're doing in the world, where do they go to find you?
Yeah, so if you want to see my ridiculous videos, you can find me at my handle, Jeff, JeffHarryPlays, Jeff Harry Plays. And if you want to work with me, or we want to dive into how we can dismantle the toxicity and cultivate more healthy masculinity and healthy femininity in your work, and also in your workplace, then simply go to rediscoveryourplay.com and click on the Let's Play button, and let's cause some mischief together.
Ooh, mischief. Well, I'll make sure all of that's put in the show notes so people can easily find that. If anybody wants to get in contact with me, you can go to my website at travisstock.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at Travers03. That's where the ongoing conversations of The New Masculine are happening. So if there's something that resonates from this conversation, please find me there and let's keep talking. And if you're enjoying the mission of this podcast, please go to patreon.com/thenewmasculine to become a supporter. Thanks again, Jeff, for joining me and for being such a wonderful guest who invited us into another layer of The New Masculine.
Thanks so much for having me. This was awesome.
Yeah. Until next time.